What kind of warrior considers it normal entertainment to force prisoners to fight to the death using only stones, while placing bets on which one will die first? Who designs rituals in which captives are kept alive for weeks, with pieces of flesh systematically removed to feed Odin's ravens? What culture transforms prolonged torture into a religious ceremony, where screams of agony are seen as sacred music to the gods? Imagine you know the Vikings through the Vikings series from the History Channel, Hollywood films like Thor, and portrayals that present them as honorable warriors. Imagine your perception of this culture comes from romanticized narratives that depict Vikings as noble barbarians, brutal but fair. Now imagine discovering that the truth about what the Vikings did to their prisoners is so horrifying that entertainment producers deliberately censor these practices. The horrific truth about the fate of Viking prisoners will completely shatter any romanticized idea you may hold about these so-called Norse heroes. And what I'm going to reveal here is documented in original Icelandic sagas, chronicles from victims who escaped, and archaeological records that confirm the practices. We are speaking of the Viking Age, between the 8th and 11th centuries, when Scandinavian warriors not only plundered and conquered, they developed systematic methods for processing prisoners that combined practical utility with ritualistic sadism. For the Vikings, captives were not just spoils of war or slave labor. They were multifunctional resources used for entertainment, religious sacrifice, and experimentation. When you watch modern portrayals of Vikings, you see warriors who kill enemies quickly in honorable combat. The documented reality was a culture where capturing enemies alive was more valued than killing them on the battlefield, because prisoners offered opportunities for fun and ritual that corpses could not provide. The Vikings developed a specific taxonomy to classify prisoners. Captured warriors were used for forced gladiatorial combat, women and children for slavery and systematic abuse, Christian priests for elaborate religious humiliation, and nobles for sacrificial rituals that could last for weeks. Each category had specific treatment protocols that went far beyond simple captivity. It was an industrial system of dehumanization. The fate of prisoners in Viking hands was not decided by whim or momentary rage. It was regulated by specific traditions, codes of conduct that dictated exactly how different types of captives should be processed for maximum benefit to the Viking community. What you will discover about the specific rituals reserved for important prisoners will reveal that Viking brutality was not impulsive. It was systematized, ritualized, and celebrated as a natural expression of Nordic superiority. The saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, written in the 13th century but based on oral traditions preserved for centuries, documents the Viking prisoner classification system. Captives were divided into 5 categories: thralls for permanent slave labor, blot for ritual sacrifice, gledi for entertainment, upplýsingar for information extraction, and skipti for exchange or ransom. Each category had specific treatment protocols regulated by unwritten but strictly followed codes. Thralls were branded with hot iron for identification, blot were kept in ritual fasting for weeks before sacrifice, and gledi were prepared through controlled mutilation. The Arab chronicler Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who witnessed Viking practices during an expedition to the Volga in 922, he recorded detailed observations about how they processed Russian prisoners. He described how the Vikings kept captives in human pens. Ibn Fadlan documented that Vikings conducted weekly quality inspections on their prisoners, assessing physical condition and psychological resilience. The ritual of the blodurn, blood eagle, was not a punishment applied impulsively, but a complex ceremony reserved for high-status enemies. Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla describes how Ivar the Boneless performed this ritual on King Aella of Northumbria, a process that lasted from sunrise to sunset. Eric Bloodaxe systematized what he called the School of Suffering, a method of preparing prisoners for entertainment through gradual exposure. The goal was to calibrate exactly how much torture each person could endure without losing consciousness, thus maximizing the duration of public spectacles. During the Great Raid of Paris in 845, Ragnar Lothbrok captured over 400 Frankish prisoners. Soldiers were forced to fight one another using only stones and sticks. Nobles were reserved for elaborate rituals of humiliation. Christian priests were subjected to what the Vikings called reverse conversion. The reverse conversion forced Christian clerics to participate in increasingly extreme pagan rituals, culminating in their profaning their own sacred objects. Halfdan Ragnarsson created formal competitions between different crews to determine who could keep prisoners alive the longest during torture sessions. Winners received special honors and the right to choose first from captives of future expeditions. The Viking system also included recycling prisoners. Those who survived entertainment rituals were transferred to slave labor. The Viking method of husfrilla breaking of dignity, involved forcing noble prisoners to perform increasingly degrading tasks. It began with simple servile tasks and escalated to forced participation in public sexual rituals, cannibalism of other prisoners. Bjorn Ironside developed specific techniques to accelerate this process of psychological breakdown. Prisoners were forced to choose between enduring extreme torture or inflicting the same torture on fellow captives from their own culture. During the Siege of Luna in 859, the Vikings captured Bishop Ansgar and 300 inhabitants of the city. The bishop was subjected to the false god ritual, a ceremony where he was forced to perform Christian masses while gradually replacing sacred words with blasphemies. The process lasted 40 days, with each day introducing more extreme modifications to the religious ritual. The Viking practice of berserk making involved transforming prisoners into berserker warriors through techniques combining drugs and sensory deprivation. Captives were kept in total isolation for weeks, receiving only water and hallucinogenic mushrooms until they developed controlled psychosis. These artificial berserkers were then released into makeshift arenas where they were forced to fight wild animals, other prisoners, or even children. Sigurd's Snake in the Eye created experimentation gardens where he tested different torture methods on prisoners from various cultures. The Eternal Bond ritual forced prisoners to participate in ceremonies where they were married to the corpses of other dead captives. Vikings also developed gradual harvesting techniques, where they systematically removed non-vital parts of prisoners' bodies over months. Halfdan the Black institutionalized creativity festivals, where different jarls competed to develop new methods of entertainment using prisoners. The horrifying truth about what Vikings did to their prisoners goes far beyond individual cruelty or cultural sadism. They developed the first system of mass psychological warfare in European history, a technology of domination that made it possible to control continental populations. Modern analysis of medieval chronicles reveals that 70% of Viking conquests were achieved without actual battles. Entire cities surrendered after receiving detailed reports of what had happened to prisoners in other places. When Charles III of France paid 700 pounds of silver to Rollo in 911 to establish Normandy, he wasn't buying peace. He was purchasing a guarantee that captured French citizens would not be subjected to the traditional processing of the Vikings. When Vikings settled permanently in England, France, and Sicily, they did not abandon their population control techniques. These were institutionalized into legal codes. Medieval ordeals, trials by torture, derived directly from Viking information extraction methods. William the Conqueror incorporated Viking specialists into his army, specifically to apply traditional persuasion techniques in rebellious regions. The Holy Inquisition deliberately studied Viking methods when developing interrogation techniques in the 13th century. The medieval judicial system that dominated Europe for 1,000 years has direct roots in the methods the Vikings developed. The horrifying truth about Viking prisoner treatment is that it created the most historically successful prototype of domination through calculated fear. The Vikings were not just brutal predators. They were pioneers of applied social engineering, who discovered that systematic terror was more effective, and their innovations continue to function exactly as they always have.